July 12, 1943. Operation Citadel, an operation designed to isolate and destroy Soviet armies near Kursk, is entering its 7th day. Leading the charge at the tip of the Southern Spear is Paul Hausser's 2nd SS Panzer Corps, the elite armoured force of the SS. Before them stands the town of Prokhorovka, by German reckoning, nothing but another speed bump on the road to Kursk. But not all is as it seems, for this is a place, and indeed the day, that Soviet forces have chosen to make their counterattack. Prokhorovka sits overlooking a major railway which links Moscow to the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv and runs through the Kursk region. Between Oktyabrsky State Farm and the settlement of Yamki, just southwest of Prokhorovka, sits Hill 252.2, in reality more of a hillock, which the railway runs over and adjacent to. This hill currently marks the furthest extent of German control in their push towards Prokhorovka. To the north of the railway, a strip of relatively open terrain would seemingly sit ready to carry SS tanks all the way to their objective. But this area is also defined by a sequence of large ditches, which at best would heavily expose advancing tanks to AT fire and at worst immobilize them. A series of settlements along the River Sel mark the northern boundary of this strip. To the south of the railway, hilly, forested and dense terrain would seem to make large-scale armoured operations difficult. 3 SS Panzer divisions make up the 2nd SS Panzer Corps and are all deployed against the Soviets at Prokhorovka. Those are, from north to south, 3rd SS Panzer Division Totenkopf, many of whom are currently making their way across the River Sel near Vasilevka. 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler occupies the centre of the advance, mostly concentrated around Oktyabrsky State Farm and Hill 252.2, though with some of its force held back to react to threats and others exploring along the south of the railway. On the Panzer Corps' right is 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, with 5 battalions defending a line from Storozhevoye through Ivanovsky Velok and ending at Yasnaya Polyana. Facing off against Totenkopf, the Soviet 5th Guards Army under Alexei Zhidov, comprised of the 52nd and 95th Guards Rifle Divisions and 11th Motorized Brigade. Against Leibstandarte, the main Soviet forces arrayed. On the Soviet right, Boris Bakharov's 18th Tank Corps, with the 181st and 170th Tank Brigades backed up by the 1000th Artillery Regiment on the front line, and reserve echelons comprised of the 32nd Motor Rifle Regiment, 36th Guards Tanks Regiment, 110th Tank Brigade, and the 42nd Guards Rifle Division. To Bakharov's left, before the gates of Prokhorovka itself, is Ivan Kudichenko's 29th Tank Corps, with the 31st, 32nd, and 25th Tank Brigades, supported by self-propelled guns of the 1446th and 1529th SPG regiments. Facing down Das Reich to the south of the main battle lines are Alexei Bedeny's 2nd Guards Tank Army Corps and Alexei Popov's 2nd Tank Corps. In the centre, troops from Leibstandarte are to work towards seizing the areas around Storozhevoye, the Stalin State Farm and the Yamki south of the railway. The main force of the division is to wait for Totenkopf to move along the northern bank of the Psel. Totenkopf's objective is to strike northeast, seizing Hill 252.4, and then pivoting southeast to strike Prokhorovka in conjunction with Leibstandarte. The Soviets, on the other hand, mean to strike before the German pincer movement can get going with a pincer of their own. The 18th Tank Corps is to sweep along the southern bank of the Sel, bypassing the defences at Oktyabrsky and push through the settlements of Prelesnoye, Mikhailovka and Andreevka, smashing through the weak boundary between Totenkopf and Leibstandarte. The 29th Tank Corps will attack Hill 252.2 directly and proceed down the railway line, aiming to smash through Leibstandarte's main force and force a breakthrough towards Komsomolet State Farm. At approximately 0600 on July 12, 1943, Marshal Pavel Rotmistrov arrived at the 29th Tank Corps' forward command post west of Prokhorovka. Overhead, German and Soviet aircraft engage in extensive air battles as both sides attempt to support their ground forces. At 0815, Soviet artillery opens fire, launching a barrage intended to suppress German positions and anti-tank defences, softening the Germans up for the attack. The bombardment, which is split between the Voronezh front and the 5th Guards Tank Army, is poorly coordinated and largely ineffective. 15 minutes later, at 0830, Rotmistrov's order to advance is issued. The 29th and 18th Tank Corps begin their attack. the 32nd Tank Brigade leads the assault on Hill 252.2, supported by self-propelled artillery of the 1446th and 1529th Regiments. The brigade immediately encounters concentrated anti-tank fire from the German positions at the hill and suffers heavy losses, in part because support in the form of the 31st Tank Brigade is slow to begin its own advance. Despite this, surviving elements reach the crest and engage entrenched Panzer Grenadiers of the 3rd Battalion, 2nd SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment. The Germans, led by Joachim Peiper, respond by calling in reinforcements. 7 Panzer IVs of the 6th Company under Rudolf von Ribbentrop counterattack from the reverse slope of Hill 252.2. They inflict some losses, but are soon overwhelmed by the volume of advancing Soviet armor. By 10 a.m., the Soviet forces have broken through and are descending the reverse slope of the hill towards the German positions at its base. Elsewhere, to the south of the railway line, the 25th Tank Brigade attacks towards the Lines State Farm, supported by elements of the 169th Tank Brigade, of the 1446th Self-Propelled Gun Regiment, and airborne and rifle units. As they advance across open ground, the formation is ambushed by Marder 3 tank destroyers and Pak-40 anti-tank guns. The German defense halts the Soviet advance after several hours of intense fighting. Meanwhile, some elements of the 31st Tank Brigade join the fight on Hill 252.2, but the 1st Battalion infiltrates south of the railway and bypasses the main German line. Reaching the southern tip of Komsomolets State Farm by mid-morning, the Soviet force positions itself in the German rear, threatening command and artillery positions. Slightly north of here, the 18th Tank Corps advances on Oktyabrsky State Farm. The 170th Tank Brigade attempts a frontal assault on the fortified position and suffers significant losses. Simultaneously, the 181st Tank Brigade moves through the villages along the southern bank of the Psel River, facing heavy resistance and fire from both Leibstandarte and elements of Totenkopf across the river. Progress is slow and costly. At the river itself, the Totenkopf Division completes its crossing at Kilyuchi and prepares for an offensive towards Hill 226.6, held by the 52nd Guards Rifle Division, 284th Guards Rifle Regiment, and elements of the 11th Motorized Rifle Brigade. The Soviets do launch some probing attacks here, but they're uncoordinated and fail to gain ground. The SS conduct reconnaissance and begin concentrating for an assault on the hill later in the day. Around 10:30 a.m., the Soviet 32nd Tank Brigade descends Hill 252.2's reverse slope towards 2 German panzer companies at its base. The Soviets misidentify the enemy tanks as Tigers and proceed to close the distance rapidly to nullify the range advantage of the Tigers' mighty 88mm cannons. Witnesses watch on in bemusement and will later compare the tank charge to a kamikaze attack. Their advance is abruptly halted by an anti-tank ditch, a Soviet one in fact, captured yesterday by the Germans and not mentioned to the Soviet tankers. Several tanks become stuck or exposed, presenting vulnerable undersides to German fire. Lacking sapper support, the brigade's momentum collapses. Tanks attempting to cross the ditch via a bridge are easily picked off by the defenders. German artillery, anti-tank guns and Stuka dive bombers further compound Soviet losses. By noon, the German defenders have regained control of Hill 252.2. An estimated 100 Soviet tanks are destroyed in the area, and SS leadership, including Paul Hausser, visits the front line to confirm the scale of the damage. Despite these setbacks, approximately 50 to 60 tanks from the 170th and 181st Tank Brigades bypass Oktyabrsky State Farm and penetrate a gap between the Leibstandarte and Totenkopf divisions. Though the area remains contested, this maneuver threatens the German rear near Komsomolets State Farm. In response, elements of Leibstandarte's Reconnaissance Battalion and Michael Wittmann's 13th Company of Tiger tanks intercept the breakthrough. Positioned on Hill 241.6, the Tigers exploit their superior range and armor to devastating effect against advancing T-34s, putting them under fire from extreme range that the Soviets cannot match. Some Soviet tanks reach Andreevka by noon, but further progress is blocked by Totenkopf units, including tanks crossing the Sel River later in the day. South of Andreevka, Wittmann's Tigers repel a second assault from the Soviet 181st Brigade. Although one Tiger is immobilized, the Soviets are unable to break through. Meanwhile, the 1st Battalion of the 31st Tank Brigade, led by Major Ivanov, which infiltrated into Komsomolets earlier in the day, is encircled. Lacking support, it is destroyed in place. All 15 tanks are lost, and the accompanying infantry is either killed or captured. A relief force from the 32nd Tank Brigade tries, but fails to reach them. At 1300, what remains of the 31st, along with elements of the 32nd, and the 181st Tank Brigades reached the northern sector of Oktyabrsky State Farm, but failed to capture it fully. By 1400, the Soviet attack has culminated and Soviet forces are spent. The 18th and 29th Tank Corps shifted to the defensive, with their formations isolated and exposed on lower ground, surrounded by German positions on the hills, now overextended and vulnerable. The Soviet offensive has failed to achieve its objectives. The Germans hold their positions and prepare to counterattack. Totenkopf by now has completed its river crossing and begun a major assault on Hill 226.6. By approximately 12:30, they've seized the high ground, forcing Soviet 95th Guards Division to withdraw under pressure. Elements of the 11th Motorized Rifle Brigade hold out for a few hours before falling back under encirclement. Following this success, Totenkopf launches a northeastward advance, aiming to cut the Prokhorovka-Kartashevka road and outflank the Soviet position from the north. To the south of the main battle lines, the Soviets are stopped perhaps even more decisively. Das Reich engages Alexei Badeny's 2nd Guards Tank Corps to the south. The Soviets suffer an early setback when their 26th Guards Tank Brigade is diverted to counter a separate German thrust, costing them 44 tanks before the main battle even begins. Badeny's delayed attack commences shortly after 11. His 25th Guards Tank Brigade captures limited terrain, including Belenikino, but is stopped short of Yasnaya Polyana by Nebelwerfer fire and Luftwaffe strikes. The 4th Guards Tank Brigade crosses a railway and engages German troops near Kalinin, but is unable to hold ground. German accounts note intense Soviet determination, but also emphasize disjointed assaults, allowing them to commit their full arsenal to each individual assault, repelling them sequentially. During the fighting, Das Reich films 8 captured Soviet T-34s taken from a Kharkov factory, which are used to ambush a Soviet column with significant success. By 1700, Das Reich captures Storozhevoye and advances to the edge of Vinogradovka. Their success secures the right flank of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. Back in the north, Totenkopf's Panzer Wedge, led by Tigers, pushes towards the Kartashevka-Prokhorovka road. Progress is slow due to mines and anti-tank defenses. By 1800, the advance reaches a line stretching from Hill 326.7 to Polozhaev. However, fuel and ammunition shortages, coupled with the arrival of Soviet reserves from the 24th Guards Tank Brigade and 10th Guards Mechanized Brigade, bring the advance to a halt. By nightfall, the battle lines solidify. Totenkopf has reached its furthest extent north of the Psel, while in the center, Soviet forces remain trapped in a vulnerable salient. They hold only the northern part of Oktyabrsky State Farm and are surrounded on higher ground from Andreevka to Hill 252.2. On the right, Leibstandarte and Das Reich secure key positions including the Stalinsk State Farm and Storozhevoye. The 167th Infantry Division maintains its line. Although Rotmistrov failed to break through or significantly damage the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, the German advance towards Prokhorovka is effectively halted. German commanders recognized that any further offensive action would require seizing Hill 252.4, but this proved unachievable. On July 13th, Totenkopf attempts to resume its advance, but is repulsed and forced back to its starting lines near Hill 226.6. This collapse in momentum eliminates any chance of a flanking assault on Prokhorovka. Now, developments elsewhere threaten the integrity of the German operations. Hitler convenes a meeting with Field Marshals von Krüger and Manstein. With Allied landings in Sicily and Soviet Operation Kutuzov threatening the Orel Bulge, Hitler decides to call off Operation Citadel. On July 17th, orders are issued for the SS Panzer Corps to withdraw and prepare for redeployment to the west. The Battle of Prokhorovka now comes to an end, having left the fields around the town strewn with the wrecks of hundreds of armored vehicles. While the Red Army has succeeded in halting the German advance, the cost is severe, and not the victory Soviet accounts will later claim. Soviet tank losses vary across historical estimates, but most placed irrecoverable losses between 235 and 308 armored fighting vehicles, with the 29th Tank Corps suffering the heaviest damage. In contrast, German losses totaled between 20 and 50 vehicles, with only 1 Tiger tank confirmed destroyed. Luftwaffe reconnaissance photograph and German records support the lower end of this range. Personnel and aircraft losses were similarly lopsided. The Soviets lost around 3,500 men and 31 aircraft, while German casualties totaled approximately 500 men and 11 aircraft. Despite these losses, Soviet official histories, shaped with political pressure, will go on to claim vastly inflated German casualties. Soviet reports will list 552 German tanks destroyed, including 93 Tigers, despite only a handful of them even being present on the field. This narrative is said to become entrenched in Soviet military historiography for many years and will persist until the 1990s, when access to German and Soviet archival documents will finally allow for a significant revision of the record. The real outcome is far more limited in scope. The German 2nd SS Panzer Corps has been unable to break through to Prokhorovka, primarily due to entrenched Soviet anti-tank defenses, not the counteroffensive launched by Rotmistrov 5th Guards Tank Army. That counteroffensive, intended to destroy the German spearhead, resulted instead in heavy Soviet losses for negligible territorial gain. In reality, a continued defensive posture might have preserved Soviet strength while still blunting the German offensive. An offensive that was already under strategic pressure from broader developments, including Operation Kutuzov to the north and Allied landings in Sicily. Prokhorovka was not the massive tank class of legend. It was not a decisive German defeat, nor a sweeping Soviet victory. It was a costly and inconclusive engagement, one that halted a local offensive but at an immense price. Could the Soviet tank forces have been better deployed elsewhere? How important was the Soviet counteroffensive in prompting Hitler to reconsider his plans in the East? The debate goes on. And if you have enjoyed this, the inaugural episode of TimeGhost Cartographic, then don't forget to subscribe. You can also join the TimeGhost Army on Patreon and help us take our series to the next level. There is a lot that we want to do with TimeGhost Cartographic, but we need your help to do it. We want everything to be on the table when it comes to this series, and I mean everything. Have a great week, and farewell for now.